that they may in all things walk before thee with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we humbly beseech thee for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou wouldst be pleased to direct and prosper all their counsels to the advancement of thy glory, the good of thy church, and the safety, honor, and welfare of our people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. O Lord our God, who art the love of justice and truth, give thy grace to our Parliament, to all who direct the affairs of our nation, and guide them by your Holy Spirit. We beseech thee that by word and deed they may promote the well-being of our people and set forth peace among all people through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
Honorable members of the Senate, before we take our seats, I would ask you to join me in a moment of reverential silence to mark the passing of the late Sybil Leacock, who, prior to entering into the House Assembly, was a member of the Honorable the Senate. May she continue to rest in peace. Please be seated. The Senate is in session.
Messages from His Excellency the President. Announcements by Your Honor, the President.
A bit of announcements. First of all, let me welcome everyone. This is not our first sitting. I think there may have been one or two not here for the first sitting. This is the second sitting. Our first sitting was for purposes of electing president, deputy president, etc. Just on the day of the opening of Parliament. So let me welcome you to our first business session. I look forward with great anticipation to your various contributions this morning and throughout the remainder of the session. I recognize we have quite a number of visitors among us. I don't have all of the names, but first of all, let me say I believe there are many guests here of Senator Walters. I want to welcome all of you and trust that you will enjoy your session with us this morning. Thank you very much for coming. And there's also guest, Shane Jones, guest of Senator Benjamin. our guest. Not a guest, but with us this morning is the Attorney General. May I remind you that an amendment to the Constitution allowed for the attendance of ministers in either house, the amendment to Section 53, and it basically provides for ministers where necessary to speak in either house on matters related to their portfolio. However, in the case of the Attorney General is able to attend to either house and to speak on any matter which is before the House. The intention, of course, is to add clarity, add information, and to help the process along. So in that regard, I want to welcome Attorney General Phil Evans, who is with us today. Not as a visitor, but as is right under the Constitution of Barbados. There are further announcements. We have indication of advice of late arrival from Senator Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers. With us, just for your information, so that you may wonder about the seats, but with us on Zoom today will be Senator Dr. Connell, Senator the Most Honorable Jerome Walcott, Senator Ryan Ford, and Senator Ramon Ali, who will join us in virtual mode in accordance with our standing orders. Those are my announcements for this morning. Minutes. We have, we don't have them, but minutes of our meeting for Friday, 20th of February, 2026. Senator Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I beg to move that the minutes of our meeting held on Friday, February 20th, 2026 be deferred at this time.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting held on Friday, February 20th, 2026 be deferred. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it, those minutes are accordingly deferred.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the following documents today. First, the estimates of revenue and expenditure 2026-2027, including the 2026 to 2027 pro forma financial statements. And secondly, the schedule of personal emoluments, 2026 to 2027.
Reports from select committees, questions from ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate moved by minister.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it. Accordingly, Standing Order 45-2 is suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Constitution Amendment Bill 2026.
The question is that the Constitution Amendment Bill 2026 be read the first time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it, the bill is read the first time.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 1, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Constitution Amendment Bill 2026.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is, as you've already indicated, not the first sitting of the Senate. It's the first business sitting of the Senate. And so we have a number of members who are here with us for the first time in this context. And I want, on that basis, to recognize new additions. Senator Karina Goodridge, representing a new political party, the Freedom of Democracy, and our independent senators. It's a strange thing for me to see Senator Rogers sitting this far up on the side of the table. I joined the Senate in 2018. It's an absolute pleasure, the Madam Deputy President is saying here from her perspective. But I joined the Senate in 2018. And at the time, there was another representative who represented the clergy. And when Senator Rogers joined and that person departed, we dubbed him New Rev. To this day, I still call him New Rev, even though he reminds me all the time that he's no longer so new. But we have accepted that it is a term of endearment and affection for one who has shared space with us for quite some time. So Reverend Rogers and Senator Malalou, look what the Lord has done. Where you are. Senator Malalou has spoken on more than one occasion about the challenges of sitting on the other side of this table and sometimes having to challenge himself to maintain stoicism between the representatives of the opposition as they were at the time and New Rev on the other side. So I'm happy that New Rev's prayers have been answered and you have now found safe haven closer to him. But I also could not go any further without acknowledging those honorable members, particularly on this side of the table, who have left us and made way for new members. We have had my sister, friend, cabinet colleague, Senator Dr. the Honorable Chantel Monroe ascending, as it so is called, into the lower house with the election for the seat of Christchurch South. And we have known her to be a hard-working member of this chamber, a hard-working member of the government, and she is loved by all in how she interacts with people. We will miss her here, but we are happy to see her in the other place. We equally will most definitely also miss where Senator Benjamin is now sitting and next to Senator Trim, the person who used to sit in that space, the one and only former Senator Gregory Nichols, now the honorable member in the other place. And his engagements across the table will certainly be missed, and I hope that Senator Benjamin, young Senator Benjamin, is able to fill those big shoes that have been left. Equally, I want to welcome Senior Minister, Senator, the Honorable Christopher Sinclair to the Senate chamber, Senator Shane Archer, Honorable Minister of State, to the Senate chamber, Senator Kamisha Benjamin, of whom I have just spoken in his absence in the House, but online, Senator Ramon Aline, and we have with us Senator Janelle Odell, who, as you would recall, also not here in the chamber now, would be former Senator Andwele Boyce, who was a fierce advocate in his speeches here for persons with disabilities, and we are extraordinarily pleased to have Senator Janelle Odell join us with an equally strong voice on behalf of those persons with disabilities. At the same time, as I close my commendations, I want to express appreciation to Reverend Charles Morris, who perhaps needed to be separated from Senator Nichols as he was at the time, because the two of them on that side of the table were a force. And we want to extend our congratulations and our appreciation for his service to the Honorable the Senate, and so too with Senator Patricia Paris. So having dispensed with those who are no longer here, I equally just want to acknowledge those who have now joined us. Senator Andrew Niles, who is known to many and who is a professional of exemplary reputation in his own right. Senator Mary Redmond, who we have known as a fierce advocate, certainly representing the trade union movement, and we have a number of trade union representatives seated around this table, which in itself and I haven't even gotten there yet, but we have a number of representatives of the trade union movement seated around this table, and that in itself speaks to the importance of workers and people in the development of a nation. So welcome to you, Senator Redmond. Senator Jamal Slocum, also an advocate. His reputation precedes him. He is known to all, and I am looking forward to his voice being used here, not only in other places, but being able to add value to the development and the governance debates from here in this honorable chamber. So that brings me, Mr. President, to the matter before the honorable chamber today. It is a constitutional amendment bill. It has been called anecdotally the anti-defection bill. It has been called the crossing the floor bill. It's been called a couple of things. So I want to begin my presentation today by getting into what the bill is. It is termed, first and foremost, the Constitution Amendment Bill. That is the bill that I introduced. And we may have to separate our Deputy President and Senator Rogers, who are very close to the microphone and whose voices are inevitably carrying in here. But it is the Constitution Amendment Bill, and it seeks to address what happens when a member crosses the floor. Now, it is important to note that in this chamber, this piece of legislation doesn't apply. This is the upper chamber. We are not elected. No one has elected anyone in this honorable chamber as their representative. But we are here by virtue of the actions taken by those who they do elect. So this is perhaps one of the best tests of the way in which two houses of parliament interact with each other. In the first instance, Mr. President, the bill attempts to speak to Section 45 of the Constitution. It deletes a full stop at the end of paragraph G and substitutes a semicolon in order to allow for the insertion of new language. And that new language reads as follows. If he, and for the benefit of those listening and those who have not necessarily spent time in parliamentary processes or in legislative reforms or in legislative drafting, the term he is standardly used across legislation. It does not say, as we do in modern terms, he versus she. It says he universally. So he, having been a candidate of a political party and elected to the House as a candidate of that political party, resigns from that political party, is expelled by that party, or crosses the floor. So you now have a new addition into that section. And then it goes on to make a change at Section 45D of the Constitution. And it talks about what happens when those things that I have just outlined take place. The seat then becomes rendered vacant. That is what is proposed. The vacation of a seat where a member resigns, is expelled, or crosses the floor, the following applies. Where circumstances referred to in Section 45(1)H arise, the leader of the House of the party as a candidate of which the member was elected, the leader of the House, the other place, whether it is the leader of government business, the majority, or the leader of opposition business, the minority, shall inform the Speaker in writing of those circumstances, and the Speaker shall, in accordance with what is written here, at the sitting of the House next, after he is so informed, make a declaration. Now, I'm pausing and making sure that I speak to the language here deliberately. There have been comments made that the Speaker should not then be the person who causes a person to vacate their seat. The Speaker has not caused a person to vacate their seat. The Speaker simply announces what the rules have provided for. The Speaker is not causing them to vacate their seat. The Speaker, at the sitting of the House next, after he is so informed, make a declaration that the member has resigned from or has been expelled by the party or has crossed the floor, as the case may be. And then it goes on to outline what happens in relation to that declaration in sections 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It then closes with the standing orders, making provision for the identification and recognition of the leader of the business in the house of every party and for otherwise giving effect to that section. And we will come to that in a few moments. But I go through this notwithstanding two things. One, that we are using for the first time in today's sitting of the Senate the right of audience. And so we have here with us the presence of the Honorable Attorney General, who is responsible for legislative drafting. He is here using that right to appear before the Senate chamber, and he will be in a position to respond to anything as the need may be. I say that also notwithstanding the fact that the Deputy President of this chamber sat on the Parliamentary Reform Commission, and in that regard would have interacted and interrogated the various concepts that were presented by the public and then discussed within the context of the PRC. They are both here today and in a position to speak not just by theoretical assumption, but by actual engagement with the law, the practice of the law, the engagement of the public through the Parliamentary Reform Commission, and then the administration through the regulations and the requirements of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, who serves as the nation's legislative drafters. So I speak with those things in the back of our minds. Now, what leads us, aside from all of the things that I've just spoken about, to find ourselves here? With the exception of, I'm looking around the room, I'm struggling actually. I think that I may be the only, and Senator Walker, maybe the only members who started the term in 2018 in this chamber. So between 2018 and now, I have seen this table look in many different ways. And I've seen the configurations as to how it has evolved. Now, Mr. President, in 2018, when I joined the Senate and the Senate was sworn in, shortly there before, we heard an announcement. And the announcement was that a member elected in the other place had made a decision to cross the floor. They had run in a given constituency, made the decision that they would sit on the opposition side, opposition benches as we call it anecdotally, of the other place, and they would speak on behalf of the opposition. They took that position, they said, because the Barbados Labour Party had won all 30 seats. So they wanted to be able to have a voice, and they spoke. Mr. President, the question then came, what would happen in the other place, this place, in the Senate? When they first crossed the floor, Mr. President, they said they had no intention at the time of necessarily making a decision on whether they would form a political party. Subsequently, and not so long after, they did so, but not before appointing 2 members to this place in their own right. We saw Senator at the time as he was, Caswell Franklin, enter this chamber. We then saw, as she was, Senator Crystal Drakes enter this chamber. She used to sit where Senator Goodrich now sits, and she, along with Senator Franklin, formed the opposition in the Senate. Along the way, if memory serves many of us who were there well, they served in their independent right. There was no political party. The party emerged along the way. And an individual who sat on that bench, not the male member, but the female member, who said they were a professional in their own right, and so they stood and they accepted the offer to sit on the opposition benches because they wanted to add their technical and their professional expertise, then found themselves a member of a political party to which they did not sign up for, but having already accepted the Senate seat. The political party emerged subsequently. Where that political party is today, Mr. President, no one knows. But we do know that when those 2 persons found themselves in a political party, there were instances where those of us in this chamber could not have any clarity as to whether or not they formed a part of the same grouping. Their leader, in the other place would say or take one position. In here, they would take a different position, and sometimes the two of them would not take the same position. So there was no clarity as to where they stood as a political party. And moreover, if we get to the question of democracy, which I will come to in a minute, the question of democracy, preserving democracy, as was the argument presented for the justification for crossing the floor at the time, what happened to democracy where the people of the constituency that they were elected by ceased to have active representation? What happened then? By the election of 2022, they no longer were running in St. Michael West. They were instead running in St. Michael Central. The people of St. Michael West, what happened with them in the intervening period between 2018 and 2022? But, Mr. President, that was not the most egregious example. By February of 2024, I believe it was 2024, we saw another example. The Barbados Labour Party in the elections held of that year, again, swept all the seats, once more. There was no member at that time, 2022, there was no member at that time that crossed the floor as happened in 2018. And so in this chamber, what happened, the president at the time in her discretion, but I'll say his universally, his discretion appointed 2 additional senators. In addition to the 7 that he normally would appoint 2 additional senators, we saw another university lecturer, talk show moderator, Dr. Christina Hines, an agriculturalist, former head of ECA, Dr. Charleston Brathwaite. So we had the government senators and we had the independent senators in the exercise of presidential discretion. That's how this chamber was constituted. During the course of the term, we then had an act of crossing the floor. We had a member who, in the February of that year, and I remember it well, it was a Friday night. And for those of you who know me, who know what happens at this time of the year with school sports, I was at St. Michael's Glow Sports that night. It was in Briar Hall in Christchurch that night. And my phone started to go crazy. What is happening, people? At Glow Sports, I cannot hear you. Stop calling me. But the messages and then the chatter evolved. On a Friday night, without a word to the people who elected him, a man crossed the floor. A person crossed the floor, I'm being reminded. He did not then, nor at any point since then, speak to the people who elected him. In fact, he is reported to have said, they will hear like everybody else. He, at the time, Mr. President, did not speak to the party on whose banner he had run once, 2 times. He did not give us that courtesy. A man who some would now hold up as a bastion of moral fortitude. Give me a break. He did not speak to the party. If you get into work late, Mr. President, you just call your boss. If you're going to be absent, you just call your boss. If you're resigning, you just give notice. You have a notice period. And you say, look, I can't work here no more. I'm looking for a different opportunity. I want to work somewhere else. And I'm going on about my business in 30 days or in 90 days, if that is your notice period. That is standard custom and practice for the workers who are in this room and the workers' representatives who are in this room. But a man who was elected by the people chose to have absolutely no respect or regard for the people who voted for him, for the people who nominated him, the people who put money in his campaign and said, go and buy a sweetie in the shop. Go and buy a 4 for $10 for the fellas down the road. Not a peep. And at no point in time has this bastion of honor even apologized to those people for the sheer disrespect that was meted out to him. Not even one time. Instead, his chest puffed right up because a political party allowed a person who did that to enter their bosoms and ascend to the leadership of their party, and then the sheer disrespect that was meted out to the people who voted for him and elected him, he turned around and from inside their own house, wreaked havoc. Havoc. We have persons who, in 2018, weren't happy with one thing or the other, and they took decisions that they felt were in their best interest. Okay. There are people who have decided that they did not have the ability to align themselves with the political party that they previously aligned themselves with, and they chose not to do so in the election process or at any point thereafter. And in some instances, on many of the talk shows, there are people who were members of the Barbados Labour Party in a previous incarnation and hate the Barbados Labour Party and will in any given day, on any given day, will take the time to excoriate anything that is Barbados Labour Party related. That is okay. That is okay. That is fine. Nobody elect them. Nobody voted for them. You can choose who you want to associate with by the right of the Constitution on any given day. You can decide that the philosophy of a given political party aligns with my personal philosophy, and so I want to stay with that party. Or if that party's philosophy or the way in which it behaves and the way in which it treats the people in the exercise of what you thought was a philosophy changes, you can decide, I don't want to associate with them no more. But what you cannot do without consequence is be elected on a platform and then choose to cross the floor without having people at the center of it. What happened, Mr. President, with the people of Christchurch South between 2024 and 2026? Who was their representative? We talk about workers. What happened to the people who were employed in constituency offices, perhaps, who, for whatever reason, they were expecting that they had a role to play? But when a constituency office is not open for a year, 2 years, what happens then to people? If you understand canvassing and electioneering, you know they're box captains. What happened to the box captains who were working with you? Who spoke to them? And I want to say, I'm a member of the Barbados Labour Party, and there is no circumstance, I say here now without fear of contradiction, there is no circumstance under which a person who has the history that that person has, Mr. Ralph Thorne, could come and lead the Barbados Labour Party, and I would stand shoulder to shoulder with him. There's no way it would happen, Mr. President, because they do not align with my philosophy of myself. That is not how you treat people, and a political party is, by definition, a mass-based institution. It is built on people. It is built on branches. It is built on constituencies. So I have been flabbergasted, to be very honest, to watch people align themselves with that. But that is the reason why, perhaps, Mr. President, we have here in our chamber a cousin of the Democratic Labour Party in the person of Freedom of Democracy, Friends of Democracy. And I have to say to her today, I respect your posture for choosing not to align with that. I respect you. I also want to say, Mr. President, that when we talk about people and representation, this bill attempts to say to people, there are a few things that I want to interrogate here now. One, if it is that you have gone to people, have commiserated with people. They identify with you. They don't only identify with you, they don't. They identify with the platform on which you stand. We just came out of an election, and in that election, Mr. President, there were platforms mounted, spot meetings, local meetings, national meetings, mass meetings. There were canvassers in and out, everywhere. And people connected with the platform on which we stood. We stood on a Democratic Labour Party platform, a Friends of Democracy platform, a Barbados Labour Party platform, and we saw the consolidation of the, I don't know what it's called exactly, but we saw the consolidation of two smaller parties, and we saw a number of independent persons come forward and say they want to offer themselves for service. But most of us in this room, if not all of us, certainly all of us around this table, on the government or the opposition side, stood on a platform for a party. What do I stand for? I am not standing here in my own right. I'm not standing here because I align with the philosophy of the Democratic Labour Party. I'm standing here because I align with the philosophy of the Barbados Labour Party. I'm not standing here because I align with the philosophy of Friends of Democracy. I'm standing here because I align with the Barbados Labour Party. And each of us stood on a platform. The ability, therefore, to disassociate your presence in the other place or even this place from the election and the engagement of a political party is impossible. So I found a study when I was preparing for today. I'm happy, Mr. President, if you wish me to add it as and to lay it as I'm going to put it up here now. Oops. To lay it as a document of the House.
Are you proposing a quote from it?
I am not going to quote from it, but I will refer to it.
If your reference goes as close as quoted, then you would need to make a document of the House. So be guided in terms of how extensively you reference it. If you're going to reference it extensively, well, then you should make it available as a document of the House. Thank
you very much, Mr. President. I am so guided. The paper looks at what they call, the title of the paper is called Strong Party System as a Condition for Representative Democracy. It was a paper that was prepared.
What's the date and author?
I'm going to do that now. It was a paper that was prepared by Mr. Hans Joachim Wien, and it was a paper prepared in 2005. The paper was prepared to be able to look at what it meant for political parties in a representative democracy, and it specifically focused on crossing the floor. In this paper, Mr. President, it talked about a number of jurisdictions, Commonwealth jurisdictions, federal jurisdictions, and so it looked at a number of African countries, including South Africa. It looked at Latin American countries, including Brazil, and it looked at European countries, including Germany. And it went through the history of parliamentary and representative democracy in different types of political systems. First past the post, like we have here. Proportional representation, like you have in Brazil and in other jurisdictions, and mixed parliamentary democracies. It went through all of those things. And what I wanted to pull on, Mr. President, is one of the questions that they raised. Who does a political seat, who does a parliamentary seat belong to? And the paper found, for the discussion purposes, that there were three schools of thought. One, that it belonged to the party, bearing in mind that I have just outlined the different types of parliamentary democracies that the paper references. Does the seat belong to the electorate? Does the seat belong to the individual? Those were the three options, three schools of thought this paper found. In the first instance, it said the party, on the one hand, especially where it is a proportional representation system, where a party presents a list of candidates, then it absolutely belongs to the party. But they also found that in those circumstances, that's where the greatest threats to democracy often came. Because in a proportional representation system, you often found small parties having to form coalitions to then constitute a government, and in so doing, the impossibility of making decisions rendered rendered countries ungovernable. That's one of the things that the paper found. It said, does it belong to the individual? If you have won the seat in your own right, me, Lisa, like people in a given area, and I want to be elected, and I've come and I've said to you, vote for you, and I have convinced you to vote for me, are you voting for me in my own right? If I'm an independent candidate, yes. If I, however, belong to a political party on whose platform I have stood and whose manifesto, principles, philosophies, governance proposals, budgeting, financial obligations or recommendations, on those things when I have agreed that these are the things that I stand for and I've stood on that platform, it cannot belong to me, the individual, on my own. But does it belong to the electorate? If you are in a first-past-the-post system, the paper does say, yes, it does belong to the electorate, and it is for the electorate to determine which number of configurations, whether it is the electorate and the individual, the electorate, the individual, and the party, but it is very clear. If you are elected as a member of a political party, crossing the floor globally in so many jurisdictions has evolved as a challenge for stable democracies. And I want to say this. In Barbados now, because we have had 3 consecutive election cycles where the Barbados Labour Party has swept 100% of the seats, there is a legitimate conversation around what does safeguarding democracy look like? How do we have strong democracies, a strong democracy and strong democratic traditions, Mr. President? Now, Mr. President, I would have to say here, in this context, one of the tenets of this particular paper is that democracy is strengthened by the presence of active, strong political institutions, active, strong political parties, and it lists a number of preconditions for that. It talks about the quality and stability being determined by a number of factors, including, 1, the makeup of parties, the strength of their internal cohesion and programmatic profiles, what are their policies, the structure and efficiency of the organization, the vitality of their members, the identification of everyone with their party, and 2 additional ones, their democratic structure from bottom to top, and from local to state level, and their internal and external media and public communication skills. Those are the things that the paper said are oftentimes critical in political institutions in order to help to safeguard democracy. It went on then to say, Mr. President, that these things, when pulled together, have the ability to do the following things: exert an influence on public opinion, participate in political education, promote the political participation of citizens. We in the Barbados Labour Party call it citizenship, education, civics. Raise a new generation of politicians and political leaders. Recruit candidates for political offices. Fill positions in parliament and government. Take on political leadership and translate decisions into action in accordance with their political aims, and to generate a lively connection between civil society and the state. These are the things that arise out of stable political institutions. But Mr. President, the fact that the Barbados Labour Party has managed not 1 time, not 2 times, but 3 times to take all 30 seats is not a function of the absence of those things internal to the Barbados Labour Party. It is a function of the absence of those things in the opposition Democratic Labour Party, Mr. President. The failure to capture imagination and the willingness to embrace a man who himself could not run in the seat for which he was elected not once but twice, but to go to a different constituency. And let me tell you here now, actually, I don't think I've said this before. The number of persons who belong to the Democratic Labour Party who did not vote must be something that must occupy the attention of that party. That's where the apathy comes. Do not project that onto all Barbadians. or certainly onto the Barbados Labour Party, let's be very clear. And it goes beyond just sheer apathy. The number of persons who were so offended by the ascension of Ralph Thorne to destroy the Democratic Labour Party from within with the full compliance of many of the members who ran on that ticket, who then took it on themselves to make sure that they worked on the ground independently with other parties to ensure he never ascended the stairs of Parliament again. The disaffection and the apathy is not anywhere else but in the Democratic Labour Party, and the sooner that the members of the Democratic Labour Party accept that and address it, the better it will be for the party. I see a lot of young faces, though. I see a lot of young faces who are enthusiastic and who seem to be committed. Make a decision here. Make a decision, because you have some things to do. There are people who, I worked in St. John in this last election. Senator Sinclair knows that. Very much so. I worked in St. John this last election. I ain't guessing, but I'm telling you. I worked in St. John last election. Hear me when I tell you. In a constituency where people have said in the past, and you heard it in the other place from one of the members, I think the Honorable Attorney General, when he spoke about when he canvassed for Hudson Griffith in the past in St. John. And he talked about people who said if they brought a dog in St. John, they would vote for him on the Democratic Labour Party ticket. The people who said, the number of people who I bucket in the constituency office, on the road in Poulan, on the road in College Savannah, on the road in every single area in St. John, who said Ralph Thorne must never win a Democratic Labour Party seat in St. John. I'm not asking you. It's firsthand. Don't make the mistake about it. So let us be clear. The public of Barbados has rallied around the idea that what happened in the Democratic Labour Party as a consequence of what happened in the Barbados Labour Party and what it has meant for political institutions, a long-standing political institution that in many instances has a proud history that it should stand up behind up until 2008 at least, but certainly from before then. The Democratic Labour Party, the public has sent you a message. It has said to you, get your house in order, starting with Ralph Thorne. That's what it has said to you. Facts. The public of Barbados has also said to you that it needs a strong democratic institution coming from the Democratic Labour Party. It has also said to you that crossing the floor in the way that has happened and the disrespect to members of the constituency who elected you is not to be tolerated by any political institution in this country ever. Not by us and not by the Democratic Labour Party. The second part of this amendment, Mr. President, speaks about expulsion. No. In the over 80-something years of the Barbados Labour Party, we have had one member who has been expelled. That process dragged on over 2 years. It reached the courts. Multiple attempts at mediation were extended over an extended period of time. And so that was the Barbados Labour Party, even at his worst. When the late Owen Arthur, Right Honourable Owen Arthur, was angry at the Barbados Labour Party, he was never expelled. That is a consequence, Mr. President, of a strong internal constitution. The constitution of the Barbados Labour Party is very clear. It outlines the circumstances under which a party member can be expelled. In the same way that the public of Barbados is calling for strong democratic institutions, they are calling equally for strong democratic institutions to have strong constitutions. That a member of the Democratic Labour Party could have been expelled in the way that he was expelled, and I'm speaking here about Dr. Ronnie Yearwood, and others who were shut out of George Street, that could have happened is a problem for the Democratic Labour Party. It is not a problem for the state. And I say again, in the same way that I say to you, get your act together, get your constitution in order. That should never be allowed to happen to anybody in this country. We all saw it. We saw a young woman who has now been voted to be the representative in St. Michael Central being locked out of George Street. We saw others who, I want to say to you, came and stood against the Democratic Labour Party because you embraced him in the 2026 election, and who in some instances worked against you because they were so offended that you would allow a man who just come, does not have any stickability, to come and so disrespect long-standing members of the party. And you say, okay, it's okay that you allowed that to happen. They stood against you in 2026. Trust me when I tell you that. So expulsion is not a light thing. It must not be taken as a light thing. And if you heard the contribution of the Honorable Attorney General in the other place, he outlined the circumstances under which, in this legislation, expulsion could come into play, certainly for this political party. And he spoke about the way in which the rules of natural justice, the rules of administrative justice would kick in circumstances where expulsion. For the record, I say here now, if a person elected by the people is expelled by the political party in accordance with their own internal constitution, for the Barbados Labour Party, we can say we have an extremely strong internal constitution, that when those circumstances occur, that there is a process which can take place. And the Speaker, having declared the seat vacant on the basis of the provisions of Section 45 and its subsections, that the Speaker then has time in which the expelled member has the opportunity to take appellate actions. And they go to the court. And the court takes a number of actions. And during the time that the court process is underway, no action, no further action can be taken against that member. It preserves their right, except in the case of the right of audience in the chamber, but they remain the representative. They remain able to have all of their town hall meetings, their constituency clinics, their meetings with their canvassers. They remain capable of doing all of those things. And in the event that the court upholds the expulsion, only then will a by-election be triggered. But in the event that the court does not uphold their expulsion, then they have to be reinstated in their original position. That is what is there in the legislation. That is what we expect, Mr. President. And so if you resign and you cross the floor, you trigger a by-election, giving the authority back to the people who elected you, and to reconcile where your position is with the ambitions and the commitments of the people who voted for you. If you are expelled, there's a mechanism under which that can be done. And so, Mr. President, I want, in closing, because I'm going to come back, I'm ceding some of my time at this point to others who are going to speak, and I want to ensure that Madam Deputy President, who sat on the commission, has enough time when her time comes a little later on in the morning to speak, and then to give the additional information of what the contemplation was of the members of the Parliamentary Reform Commission and what the members of the public would have felt. But I say this now as I look at the legislation for the final time before taking my seat. I believe that Barbadians live in a society where we have one degree of separation. Most times we know each other despite whichever political side of the fence we sit on, or none, as the case may be. But the ability of Barbadians to elect the representatives that they see represent them, that they can identify with, is something that we hold sacrosanct. People will choose different political affiliations all the time, but you have to do so before going to the people and forming a contract with them, before going to the people and forming a covenant with them. Because then, once you have done so, the basis on which that marriage contract has been signed must be respected. You cannot just randomly pick up and say to the public, I done with this here, I get on with my business, and for 2 years, completely ignore the people who elected you. Barbadians deserve better than that. Constituents in our communities deserve better than that. And it was, I must tell you, it was stunning to me to see the members of the other side who came out in Christchurch South in particular, this last election. Did they know that for almost 2 years, if not more, the people they were asking to vote for them have been abandoned by their leader? Were they not clear on the contradiction that they represented? I was confused that they were so confused. Were they not clear, Mr. President, of the contradiction that they represented even by their presence and their commentary? And even that was it was a rubbing salt in wounds. So my representative has gone along and left me. You ain't say nothing. You ain't do nothing. You have elevated him instead to lead your party ostensibly to do what? To do the same thing to everybody else that he did to us? And you know, come to me to say, elect us? Did they not see the contradiction? How? Mr. President, I submit to you that this bill before this honorable chamber is critical, it is timely, it is moral, it is decent, it is philosophical, it is democratic, and it represents the ultimate engagement of the people of Barbados in its democratic process. If you vote for me, what I say will be what I mean. What I do will reflect my commitment to you, my covenant with you, that I came to you in the first place for you to vote for me. And if I want to change from that, as is my right to do, that is nobody's beef with you. You can do that. You can. You can decide, look, if it was me, just suppose, if it was me, I would have said, I have an executive, but I would have needed an executive first because the executive didn't meet for over a year, so there were not even elected people in Christchurch South for a long time. If it was me, I would have met with the people who at least served in my very last executive. I would have said to them, look, I feel as if the Barbados Labour Party no longer represents me. Although I'm not quite sure, Madam President, how that would have been the case because I was in a parliamentary party since 2018, and the number of parliamentary group meetings, we meet as a political party every single week. Once a week, guaranteed we meet. As long as there is parliament and often when there is not. We meet. We discuss the parliamentary agenda. We discuss matters which are coming to parliament. I can count since 2018 when I was here, on one hand, the number of meetings that the former leader or the leader of the Democratic Labour Party came for. One hand. He was never present. And when he came, you wouldn't even notice he was there because he was absent in person. We would have retreats. We would have strategic planning meetings. If he came, he was present but absent. We had dedicated sessions before every single estimates discussion, always absent. That is your leader? How? How? I know who my leader is. She leads from in front, ever present, always on the front foot. But that is your leader, and you are proud to stand up behind that. And when he crossed the floor, I thought to myself, but after 5 years plus, we still don't know parliamentary procedure because he's been absent. Absent all the time. And if you were to watch parliamentary debates in the other place, you would see that even after he has finished speaking. Same thing. That is the leader you want Barbadians to line up behind. Barbadians told you no, though. Not a chance. Never going to happen. And so, Mr. President, the precedent has been set, not once, but most egregiously on a second occasion, that the people of Barbados deserve representatives who will be just that, representatives, who will stand with them in good times, in bad times, and in bad times, that they will give them the respect of their vote, the respect that their vote commands. And you will go back to the people. And if you think that you are so great in your individual right, the people will elect you in your individual right. But once you have veered from your original election, you make the decision. This, Mr. President, has been reviewed, and we have had legal luminaries who have come in and who have crafted the legislation. They have made the judgment that this is the appropriate location for this amendment in the Constitution in Section 45. They have framed how it is to be done. There was even in the Barbados Labour Party, Mr. President, a conversation around whether it would be treated to as urgent, especially in cases where a person was expelled and they needed to make appeals to the court. And the determination coming back from the drafters was that if it is urgent, by definition, constitutional motions are always deemed by the courts to be urgent, and as such, it is usually heard within a short time frame, which does not usually go past 48 hours. Even on election day, Mr. President, we saw matters before the court at 7 o'clock in the night. That is the custom, it is the practice in this country, Mr. President, urgent for all constitutional matters, and it is our expectation and our advice from the legal experts who have spoken on this matter that it would be the case in this case. And so, Mr. President, as I take my seat, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time. I commend this bill to the Honorable the Chamber. I commend this bill to Barbadians, and I in particular commend this bill to the Democratic Labour Party.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to my fellow senators, and welcome to those joining us in this chamber. Good to be back, Mr. President. Not sure if you expected to see me back here, but I didn't expect it either. But to be honest, it is good to be here to continue to represent the voice of the people. Notice I've not seen the voice of the opposition, because it is the voice of the people who sometimes will agree with what the government has to say and who sometimes will disagree with what the government proposes as their policy. This is an interesting debate, Mr. President, at this time. I think it's one that's very sensitive for many reasons, as you have heard in the presentation from the Leader of Government Business, especially with me speaking. But before we get into the contents of the bill, the Constitution Amendment Bill 2026, I think it is important for me to share with this chamber and with the public that this Barbados Labour Party government has been tinkering with the Constitution of Barbados. And this is an echo from outside of the chamber that I bring into the chamber this morning. This is what has been said in many different spheres, from the intellects, from the laymen, and that they wish for this practice not to be continued by this government. And if you go back to 2018 to present, there have been a few amendments to the Constitution of Barbados, but I wish to focus on a few of those amendments, Mr. President. In 2018, after the government was victorious in the election, on June 5th, 2018, the House of Assembly passed the bill to amend the Constitution to revise the qualifications for membership for the Senate, that ultimately allowed 2 of their party members to sit in the upper house, Mr. President. That was one of the first acts of this government when they won by significant majority in Parliament to amend the Constitution to allow 2 of their members to sit in the House of the Senate. After the general election of 2022, this same government, after another victory, 30 Love, as was mentioned before, in the House of Assembly on February 8, 2022, passed a bill again to amend the Constitution of Barbados, to change the qualification for membership of the Senate and the House of Assembly once again. Unfortunately, Mr. President, that bill was not passed, and it was subsequently withdrawn August 10th, 2022. So after the first general election, you saw the amendment of the Constitution to facilitate what I will call members of the Barbados Labour Party. We saw an attempt to do that directly after the 2022 election, but that motion failed. And now today we are seeing 2026, that this week, February 24th, the House of Assembly passed a bill that limits the ability to cross the floor. And the government has premised this on stability of the Barbados Labour Party government, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, can you imagine that a government's first actions after 3 successive victories, 30 Love in 2018, 30 Love in 2022, 30 Love in 2026, will focus on a self-serving need for their party and their members, and not the fullness of interest to the public who has elected them? That is how people feel about these amendments to the Constitution, Mr. President. Not to address key concerns or press on to the public business that is expected of them, especially given such a majority in the House, but to tinker with the Constitution in a way that really benefits a few. Mr. President, even on the eve of the election, on November 25th, the House of Assembly passed a bill to provide for the election of an independent person who is not a member of either House of Assembly or the Speaker or the Senate to the office of the...
Senator Walters, I hate to interrupt you. I would recommend that you want to make a change. The tinkering suggests some impropriety, you can make large amendments, you can make small amendments, but an amendment is an amendment. And I would suggest that you would want to withdraw the use of tinkering to describe the amendment, and say anyone will have their interpretation as to whether they like the amendment or like the amendment, but it's an amendment. To tinker would suggest that you have you've done something improper, and this is an amendment to the Constitution, and I take the point you're making, but I want to suggest you withdraw the word tinkering and just speak to the fact that they have amended the government has amended the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. President. So withdrawn. And as I said, Mr. President, I guess we get the point. And I was just bringing the vocabulary from the public into the Senate so that they too would understand what I am saying when I come to represent them and be their voice. But even on the eve of the election of 2026, in November of 25th of 2025, the House of Assembly passed a bill that would allow an independent person to sit as the Speaker of the House. And the former Speaker of the House, Mr. President, did not contest the last election, but now assumes the role of Speaker of the House, of the independent Speaker of the House, Mr. President. Another constitutional amendment that does not have far-reaching benefits to the public of Barbados, but more seeks to position members of the Barbados Labour Party in Parliament, or in this case, outside of Parliament. Mr. President, between 2018 and 2026, there were 8 constitutional amendments passed, 1 failed, with the exception of this one, Mr. President, because it's not passed as yet, and in a total of 9, which means, Mr. President, that 33% of the amendments to the Constitution since 2018 had very little to do with the livelihoods of Barbadians. And that is concerning. And Mr. President, I hope that today, that this bill does not pass, because if this bill passes today, Mr. President, that will mean that close to half of the legislation passed to amend the Constitution since 2018 was more self-serving to the Barbados Labour Party than it was in the interest of the Barbadian public, Mr. President.
Senator Walters, I hate to interrupt you again. I understand the political point you're making. However, the standing orders does say that a member cannot impute improper motives to members of either house. And I think that the statement that the amendments have been self-serving to members of the Barbados Labour Party is an imputation of improper conduct, because the constitutional amendments will be there for all time. They will not just be there for members of the Barbados Labour Party. And I think that in relation to the standing orders, because I understand the political point you're making, that you're a politician, you'll make a political point, but it cannot really trespass on the standing orders. So you really need to withdraw that, rephrase, and roll again.
Mr. President, as I said, thank you for your intervention. And as you said, you got the point. The point is that almost half of the amendments to the Constitution since 2018 would not have been in the best interest to benefit Barbadians in totality. And when you talk about they were not encouraging transparency, they were not safeguarding the rights of people in the country, they did not strengthen public voice or public opinion, but they were more, in my opinion, Mr. President, more internal to the government and the government's members and friends. But to make matters worse, Mr. President, it is one thing to amend the Constitution, and there is another thing to amend the Constitution even when public consultation says otherwise. And I refer to the report of the Constitutional Reform Commission dated September 2024. And on page 138 and 139, it deals with the issue of recall of members of the Parliament and crossing the floor. So we are here to debate this bill, Mr. President, that will essentially limit parliamentarians from disassociating themselves with the government. But this recommendation from the Commission is as follows, and this document is already a document of the House, so I will just quote from it, Mr. President. And it says, the Commission does not recommend the introduction of any mechanism for the recall of individual members of Parliament, nor does the Commission recommend the removal of a member of Parliament where the member of Parliament defects from the political party of which they are a member when they were elected. Mr. President, that is an extract from the report of the Constitutional Reform Commission, September 2024, that opinion that during their consultation process, that position was not taken. The position that is asked to be passed and accepted today and by the public was not taken. So not only is the government seeking to continue to amend the Constitution, in this case for a minority group, which is politicians in general, Mr. President, but it is going contrary to public discourse and official reports from commissions that have been established to review such policy. In addition, Mr. President, the report of the Parliamentary Reform Commission dated June of 2024 also discussed crossing the floor. And the majority opinion on page 17 of that report, and I read, Mr. President, the Commission endorses a member's right to cross the floor, form their own party, or become independent. As such, the Commission does not recommend that a seat should be thereby declared vacant and a by-election held. If constituents are displeased with their MP crossing the floor, it will sound out at the next general election as it often has. End of quote, Mr. President. Mr. President, the report of the Parliamentary Reform Commission expands on this point on page 94, and it says, aside from potential issues of the constitutional right to freedom of association, the right to cross the floor is an important element of opposition in a democratic society. Specifically, a parliamentarian may feel that he can no longer associate with or support the political party of which he has been a member. It is in the interest of democracy that he should be free so to do. If the electorate is dissatisfied with his decision, that will be, and often is, reflected at the next general election. Mr. President, I made these points just to reiterate my opening of the decision of the government in numerous occasions to, one, pursue constitutional amendments that really do not resonate across Barbados, and two, pursue those amendments well in contradiction to national voice and opinion of established committees that were set out to do just that, Mr. President. And I also would remind the Chamber that the amendment that was passed in the end of last year to elect or select an independent speaker to the House of Assembly was also not recommended by the Commission, Mr. President. So the government seems to be consulting with the public, but they are not taking the feedback or the advice or the recommendations from those official forums, Mr. President. So I open there, Mr. President, to shape in the minds of this chamber and in those listening the intent, what is the intent of this government when it comes to constitutional amendments of this nature. And we talk about the timing of it, Mr. President. And you're getting this amendment in a time where the government has retained all seats after election. And you go to the fact, Mr. President, that the objects and reasons for this bill, as identified on the bill, is to promote political stability by limiting parliamentarians' ability to cross the floor. To promote political stability, which suggests that there is opportunity for political instability, Mr. President. And how is the government saying that after such a majority, and they like to count 30, 30, 30, 92 by elections, 92 victories, that we are on the brink of an unstable government, Mr. President? Is that what right-thinking Barbadians are to assume by the objects of this bill? That they must pass this bill because it promotes political stability? Mr. President, the Oxford Dictionary refers to political stability and instability. Political instability refers to volatility in a government or political system, often involving a breakdown of authority, violent conflict, or frequent changes in leadership and policy. And if you go closer to this government's management over the last few years and their relationship with international bodies, the International Monetary Fund generally defines political instability as the propensity for a government collapse or significant disruptions in the political system, often measured by events like assassinations, riots, general strikes, and irregular executive changes. Mr. President, nothing listed in those two definitions or the reality as I know it, as you know it, Mr. President, I'm sure, or the people of Barbados know it, that we are on the brink of some political instability, that we must rush this bill without consideration for further consultation with reputable bodies and the electorate. Up to now, was Barbados ever politically unstable? And I ask the question, how does a government that commands such a majority, that even if one or two persons intended to shift, would that make the government unstable? Would that, Mr. President, disrupt the bloated cabinet of 26 ministers, Mr. President? Mr. President, the government is full of contradictions because with all of the movements of persons passing the floor, crossing the floor in recent time, the reality is that they have boasted that they have done well as a government. So you have boasted that you have done well. However, you now come to foist this on the people of Barbados with haste. Mr. President, the public is crying out. The organizations are crying out because they do not think that enough consultation has occurred. The bill was made public, I think, on Monday of this week. It was tabled, debated, and passed on the floor of Parliament on Tuesday. We are here today, Mr. President, a few days after, to do the same thing. We have suspended the standing orders so that we can get through the debate today as well, as is the case in the lower house. And the government is and the public is wondering what is so important about this bill. Is there something that we do not know that this has to happen in this manner, in this week, with such priority, when there are other things to attend to in terms of national concerns? And when we talk about lack of consultation, Mr. President, sometimes when an opposing view comes to the chamber, and they do it all the time, they say, what is your source and who are you representing, etc. So sometimes it's good to bring the views of others. And I wish, Mr. President, to offer or ask to be a document of the House, a press release from the Barbados Bar Association, dated February 27th, 2026, Mr. President. It's a press statement, Mr. President. And I just would like to reference the statement because, Mr. President, a part of that statement says that the BBA, the Barbados Bar Association, expresses serious concern that the bill was introduced without prior consultation with the body. As a body charged with upholding the rule of law and safeguarding the proper administration of justice, the BBA is uniquely placed to provide principled, technical, and non-partisan input on matters of constitutional significance. The failure to engage with the BBA before presenting a bill of such profound constitutional consequence represents a troubling disregard for established democratic norms and expert legal guidance. These are not my words, Mr. President. This is the words of the professional body, and these are the sentiments of the Barbados public. So, Mr. President, that is where we are. We are in a position where the government advances what they want, ignores consultation, and enacts legislation even if they do not have the support of the electorate. A lot of this discussion, Mr. President, seemed to be focused on crossing the floor and seemed to be focused on an individual rather than the concept. And I've never heard the leader of business refer to Ralph Thorne so much times in my 2 years in the Senate. Never, ever, Mr. President. I'm not even sure if we called his name once. But, Mr. President, there is a fundamental difference. And the difference is that when you're singing for your supper, you have to take the notes and do what the Prime Minister says.
Senator Walters, I refer you again to Standing Order 34.5. You cannot impute improper motives to honorable members. And you know that ministers take an oath to be faithful to Barbados and to the Constitution, and they are able, if they so desire, to ignore instructions. They may not be ministers anymore, but they can ignore instructions, can resign. You can, you really know better, Senator Walters. You cannot. You cannot, in the debate, accuse honorable members, any honorable members in here, of singing for their supper. Please withdraw that and move on.
Thank you, Mr. President. I withdraw that. And I say it this way, Mr. President. There is a difference, and I think it was alluded by the leader of government business, Mr. President. There's a difference between a person who sits in the Senate and a person who sits in the House of Assembly. And the fundamental difference is that the person who sits in the Senate, as the term we use, sits at the mercy of those who selected that person. And the persons who sit in the House of Assembly sit at the mercy of those who elected that person. So I'm just saying, Mr. President, that I'm not surprised today of the stance of Senator Cummins, who seems to me, is ensuring that she continues to be selected as a person that sits in the House of Senate.
Senator Walters, you're not only trespassing on the rights and privileges and reputation of Senator Cummins, but all members in here are appointed by someone. You included, Senator Walters, and I'm sure, Senator Walters, that these honorable senators, notwithstanding the source of the appointment, will not spend their time in sole contemplation of what could be in the minds of the person who appointed them. And therefore, I'm not trying to defend Senator Cummins. I'm trying to defend the honor of the Honorable Senate and the good men and women who, over many years, have agreed to serve under the Constitution, which has appointments by a Prime Minister, by the head of state, by the leader of the opposition where there's one, and if there's none, the head of state appoints 2 additional. And I would not have you call into question the honor of those who've accepted or the motives of those who have appointed. But please don't go there. Please withdraw that and move on to your other point.
Thank you, Mr. President. So withdrawn. I was just trying to draw the parallel from my fellow senators' conduct and reference to an individual that is obviously, as I said, was not customary to that type of language and behavior previously as I sat in the chamber for the last 2 years. But a lot of this discussion seemed, Mr. President, to have been focused on the individual and the act of an individual, especially over the last 2 years. And it speaks to me, Mr. President, of a government that was uncomfortable with what occurred. The government was uncomfortable with what occurred, Mr. President. I have not seen or heard of a riot in Christchurch South. I've not seen or heard of any upheaval to Mr. Ralph Thorne. 3 minutes, Mr. President, to conclude. Or Mr. President. Yes, Mr. President. Well, definitely will not get through a lot of my substantive points. But, Mr. President, I have not seen I have not seen this sort of energy coming from the persons who elected that member of parliament. And I am disappointed, Mr. President, that in the other place and in here today, it sounds to me as though we are in a Barbados Labour Party branch meeting and not in the House of Parliament. I am disappointed. I feel as though I am part of a Barbados Labour Party branch meeting who is trying to ensure that their members fall in line or keep a certain line. If not, they will be penalized. Mr. President, the reality is that what the government has been saying publicly does not align to some of the specificities in the bill. The specifics of the bill are not addressed significantly, and they trespass into the zone of political party more so than public. We talk about the expelling of members and the resignation of members from a party. But honestly, the average person that sees a story in the media that is discussing this really believes that this is about just crossing the floor. So they have a different opinion because there is some softness to the fact that, yes, there is a notion that there are other components other than the individual who puts forward himself to the electorate, and the party does carry an influence in terms of him or her winning their seat. But there has not been enough discussion on the inclusion of the party politics, the element of party politics in this discussion. Because, Mr. President, when someone is expelled or resigns from the party, that is the business of that individual and the party. That is not the business of the Parliament of Barbados. And it must not be enshrined in the Constitution, Mr. President. There are two separate scenarios and situations. And a party, if they have a strong constitution, they must have things to deal with it. And if the Barbados Labour Party thinks their constitution is strong enough, they should have no issues with dealing adequately with persons who are expelled and persons who resign from the party, while ensuring that that person continues to have the opportunity to represent the people that elected them. And this notion about once you disassociate yourself with the government, that you do not represent your people, is a false statement. Because I disassociate myself with the government and I go and sit someplace else in the House of Parliament, does not mean that I will not open my branch office, I will not meet the residents, I will not deal with their concerns, I will not treat them as though I am their duly elected representative. So that notion is a false notion. So this, I know I do not have more time, Mr. President, but where my comments will end is that the Barbados Labour Party must not treat the Parliament or the Constitution like a Barbados Labour Party branch meeting or annual conference. That they must separate the two and it must remain separate. If a party has its issues with dealing with the behavior and conduct of its members, they must find a way to deal with it that does not interfere with the Parliament of Barbados and the choice of the electorate to elect a candidate to represent them for the next few years, Mr. President. As I said, Mr. President, I have run out of time, but thank you so much for considering my comments.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Speakers on it. Senator Kellen, Dr. Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for acknowledging me and thereby affording me the opportunity to speak to this bill to amend the Constitution in order to promote political stability by limiting parliamentarians' ability to cross the floor. Firstly, sir, I wish to congratulate you for having been reappointed to the Senate and re-elected as the President of the Senate. And I also congratulate the other honorable senators who are here, some for the first time, and I do look forward to your contributions throughout the course of this session. I personally wish to thank His Excellency, the President of Barbados, for the confidence reposed in me to speak on behalf of the people of this country in this honorable chamber. It is indeed an honor to serve my country in this capacity, sir. As I've mentioned several times before, I do believe that Barbados is one of the most stable democracies in the world. This is evidenced by our seamless transitions of power after customarily peaceful, fair, and free election processes. Of course, this year there were international observers here for the first time, and I suspect that that was just a reaction to some questions that were raised about the fairness of the process. However, that may have been more a case of complacency on the part of the electorate and those who see after the election than corruption. It is either or, you can take your pick. I go on the side of complacency, sir. The stability of this democracy, Mr. President, is buttressed by the seemingly non-existent ideological divide between the two major political parties, which have contested our elections and whose representatives have led this country over the near 60 years post-independence. This lack of clear delineation between our parties has been one of our greatest strengths, as I've said before. It is one of our greatest strengths because it gives political actors the opportunity to move from one side to the next and nestle into the other as though they were there all the time. The veracity of this assertion is there for all to see at present. It's there in the cabinet, it's there in the other place, and it's there around this table. I sat for 7 years in this place hearing about the lost decade, sir. I'll say no more. However, sir, as I've also cautioned this place, our greatest strength can prove to be our greatest weakness if people perceive that there's an elite political class of people who look after themselves, that pat each other's back while using the masses as pawns in an electoral process. In such a situation, the people can become disillusioned and refuse to participate in what they may perceive to be a farce. Or as cultural ambassador, the most honorable Anthony Gabby Carter said, politicians make a mock sport at we. And maybe that is a good place to begin our look at this bill that is before us. From the outset, it raises several questions. What are we trying to fix? Or as they say in another place, what is the mischief? Why so urgently? Will this fix solve the real major issues of governance confronting this parliament and this country as it is now constituted? The bill sets out as its objects and reasons to promote the stability by limiting parliamentarians' ability to cross the floor. Mr. President, permit me to go a little back in my experience in this country. I came to this country just about 40 years ago. And after a while, I was very intrigued by the political maneuverings as were described earlier. I was very concerned that the act of crossing the floor should automatically trigger a by-election. In my thought, that is what should happen. However, over time, I realized that it is just the way politics is done in this country. And it comes because, as I said, there's a lack of a clear ideological divide between the two major parties. The most recent consultations with the electorate, the general public, by way of the Parliamentary Reform Commission and the Constitution Reform Commission, have both reported majority positions for maintaining the status quo. And the Parliamentary Reform Commission, which was quoted earlier, says, the Commission does not support any barrier to or restriction on a member of Parliament crossing the floor. And it further stated, aside from potential issues of the constitutional right to freedom of association, the right to cross the floor is an important element of opposition in a democratic society. Specifically, a parliamentarian may feel that he can no longer associate with or support the political party of which he has been a member. it is in the interest of democracy that he should be free to do so. That's the Parliamentary Reform Commission. There's a minority opinion in that report, which I'm sure we will hear later, because I believe the crafter of that minority opinion is in this chamber with us. In essence, what I've highlighted, sir, is that there's no groundswell from the people for this apparent urgent amendment. In fact, the majority opinion of the Parliamentary Reform Commission and the Constitutional Reform Commissions align with the Commonwealth Latimer House principles on the 3 branches of governance, which was founded in 2003. I believe it was quoted in the other place. And this was agreed to by law ministers throughout the Commonwealth at their heads of government meeting in Abuja, Nigeria in 2003, between December 5th and December 8th. And Barbados was represented by no less significant a person than the Honorable Owen S. Arthur, who was Prime Minister at the time. And if you'll permit me to quote from that document, sir, Section 3, Clause 2 states, under the clause, security of members during their parliamentary term is fundamental to parliamentary independence, and therefore, the expulsion of members from Parliament as a penalty for leaving their parties or floor crossing should be viewed as a possible infringement of members' independence. Anti-defection measures may be necessary in some jurisdictions to deal with corrupt practices. Now, I do not believe that Barbados has any corrupt practices, sir. I would hate to think so. Not with a party that has led it with a majority for 3 terms. While I believe that the practice of crossing the floor can be disrespectful to the electorate, given Barbados' history of the practice, I believe that compulsory expulsion at this time would create more instability than stability. I'll elucidate on this later. During the last session of Parliament, sir, I believe it was March 15th, 2022, and I remember it very well for something else that happened on the 19th. On that occasion, we received a bill for amendment of the Constitution. And in a nutshell, it was to create the space that the party that gained the 2nd largest number of votes in the election will be considered the opposition, that is in a case where there's no opposition in the House, and therefore be able to place 2 members in the Senate. I opposed it at that time for a reason, because we were introducing a creature into the Constitution that was not there before, that is votes in an election. The Constitution does not recognize that. And once you start introducing votes in an election, it creates another problem, because then you have to ask yourself the question, if you are bringing this party that got the 2nd largest number of votes, whatever they were, in an election in as the opposition, what happens to Clause 74, where the opposition is derived from the House? What happens if a member crosses the floor? The conundrum you would have had then, sir, is that somebody who got 1,500 or 2,000 votes in an election could have crossed the floor and, according to Clause 74, become the leader of the opposition, while there's another clause that places a group here that it calls the leader of the opposition on 20,000 or more votes. It would have created a constitutional conundrum. That was shelved, thank goodness. Mr. President, what would have solved the problem at the time, as I believe will solve the problem at this time, but I was assured then that Acts 2 and verse 46 was very much in place in the other house, that they were all in one accord. It turns out they were in a SWIFT. But I was told they were all in one accord, sir, and nobody was crossing the floor. So, that aside. And we know what came out of that, sir. What I believe would have helped there at that time is if a clause had been introduced or some measure had been introduced that suspended the enactment of Section 74 of the Constitution in a case where there's no opposition in the House. It would have solved the problem, and it probably can solve whatever problem we're trying to solve here as well. But I want us to pay close attention to what is really being said here. It means that if a person disagrees with his caucus in Parliament and crosses the floor and no longer wishes to be a part of that, it should automatically trigger a by-election. Now, this is the first because it means that such a person may well be on the side of right. We are assuming here that the majority is always right. What happens if a parliamentary group is going down a rabbit hole that can lead to the destruction of our country, and one person jumps up and says, "Do not go there"? He should be put out. And I know that we allow the space for the by-election and so on, but we know what will happen, sir. We know when the juggernaut of the party's machinery gets on the ground, everything falls apart. Let's not fool ourselves. And I'll speak to that after this. Our history does not support the urgency of this bill on the grounds of which it is presented. It doesn't. But that is not the most serious part of the bill for me. If we want to have by-elections and when people cross the floor, that's not a big thing. The devil in the details in this particular piece of legislation comes in the section 45(1)H that is being proposed to be inserted. That section states, sir, Section 45(1) states, the seat of a member of a House of Assembly shall become vacant, and there are regulations A to G, which the Constitution provides for that, but H, it shall become vacant if he, having been a candidate of a political party and elected to the House as a candidate of that political party, is expelled by that party or crosses the floor. As I said, sir, the devil is in the details. It is true that enshrined in the Constitution in Section 21, the Constitution says that people have a right to association and a right to join a political party. Thus, the Constitution recognizes that there are such things as political parties. However, what the Constitution does not do, it does not care to know the parties. It does not care to know you. It does not know the tenets of the party. It does not know the rules for the membership or expulsion from membership of the party, because they're not enshrined in the Constitution. And that is fine where the Constitution is concerned. And this creates the biggest challenge in this bill, because the danger in Section 45(1)H is that is being inserted here is that it gives a political party, which the Constitution does not know, a ghost institution to the Constitution, the right to remove a seated MP in accordance with its own tenets, while the Constitution does not know it. And I believe that Senator Cummings gave a very compelling reason why this should not pass when she described the debacle in George Street a few years ago. That is the stability we're offering here. There seems to be a deliberate ambiguity in Section 45(1)H in that it mentions elected to the House as a candidate of that political party. I do not believe that the ambiguity is by guile, but in recognition of the delicate balancing act of the difference between a candidate and a representative. They're two different species. Political parties do not produce representatives. If they did, we would not have elections. Political parties present candidates to the electorate. And the electorate then determines who the representative will be. Once the candidate is chosen, elected by the people, he ceases to be a candidate of the political party and becomes a representative of the people. The representative is therefore a servant of the electorate and not the political party. And therefore, it almost seems like overstepping one's boundaries or a power grab to believe that a political party, that the general council of a political party, the configuration of which the Constitution does not know, can remove a seated representative of the people. The reasoning being presented for this is that the candidate runs on a party ticket, and then the votes that are procured by the candidate are really the votes of the party. Sounds plausible. I do hope that we disabuse our minds of so myopic a view of the electorate. The reality is that there's a confluence of factors that goes into the election of a representative. Not everybody who votes for a representative agrees with the party they're put there by. Some people hold their noses and vote simply because they have to or they feel they need to. Some people actually despise the party, but they might like the candidate. They vote for the representative because he or she may be the lesser of two evils in their eyes. But it doesn't mean that the party can hold on to those votes and claim the votes of the people as the votes of the party. I believe that Senator Cummings gave us a wonderful example of this through her canvassing in St. John, where people rejected the candidate. They might have supported the party, but they weren't going to vote for the party just because it put a candidate there. Their choice was made based on the candidate. I've said several times before, sir, that the role of a political party and the role of a government are by nature two different things. Totally different. The role of a political party is to present candidates for an election, well, one of their roles, and to decimate their opposition, as the juggernaut of the Barbados Labour Party has shown is very competent to do. However, those candidates being elected then become representatives of the people in the parliament of the country, and who will be governed by the rules of expulsion of the Constitution as set out in section 45(1)(a) to G. The representatives are expected to carry out the mandate of the government, and the government is there to cater to the needs of all the people. A political party is not designed to do that, just by the design, just by the nature. The party presents candidates, the people produce representatives. A representative by nature of his origin ought not be subject to the tenets of a political party. He may be a member of the party, and therefore, as a member, can be expelled from the party. But as a representative of the people, it should never be. Not in a stable democracy like ours. And additionally, sir, this brings into the discussion the potential of abuse of the system. Abuse of the system where certain MPs can be targeted and have their lives disrupted and their representation of the people truncated by the machinations of a political party. A representative should have the right to be cantankerous. A representative should have the right to be eager. A representative should even have the right to be a despot if they want to be. It is a given, sir, that political parties are some of the most volatile institutions in the society. And it's just by nature of their construct. And so, for all the lovely things that we've been hearing, all political parties have their inner struggles. And those inner struggles should not be brought to bear on the parliament that the people have put in place. You know, I would hate to think that the AI image that I heard some 2 years ago, where one person was saying, we're not paying this lawyer because if he represents this person, what will happen to that? And then you end up seeing, I know it's AI because I see the same people in the party now. So it must be AI. It can't be nothing else, sir. And as I said, sir, I sat in this parliament for 7 years. And all I hear is the lost decade and the diabolical actions and da. Look around the table, sir. Look in cabinet. Stability? A political party? And I'll even take it further. Add the great elephant in the room, campaign financing. Sir, I've asked before, and I'll ask again. I can't get an answer. You see, our political system is like a game of musical chairs. But I can't find out who the DJs are at all. Somebody playing the music and I can't find out who it is. But we know the DJs determine when people sit and when they won't. What are we introducing here? A case where a DJ can now pick out a representative and decide not he? We have to take it to its logical conclusion, sir.
Or its illogical.
It's not. We always have to prepare. We always have to prepare for Exodus 1 and verse 8. Critical portion in the Old Testament. There arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. There may arise a political party that don't care about anything we're doing here. And we don't know what their tenets are because we're about to pass a legislation that says you don't need to know them. And they can remove people who the people have elected. I'm not imputing motive to any party or any group here, sir. But I do not believe it is in the interest of our democracy to give power in the Constitution to a ghost institution where nobody knows its tenets, nobody knows how its leadership is chosen, and we should not give that institution the opportunity to unseat a member of parliament. The Constitution removes members of parliament not by the tenets of political parties, but by what is enshrined there, no matter how popular the party may be. Back to the Latimer principle, sir. Under the same section 2 that speaks to the security of members of parliament, Part D says the cessation of a member of a political party of itself should not lead to the loss of a member's seat. And I again raise the question, what is the urgency here? And I dare say that this is not the time for us to be passing this legislation. I know I heard about the 92-0, the 330 loves and all those things, but look at the numbers carefully, sir. In 2018, when the ruling party won, they gained at least over 112,000 votes, which represented 40% of the electorate at the time. By 2026, when everything is tabulated, it's quite possible that the number of votes garnered by the ruling party at this time will be less than what it gained when it lost the election in 2013. And amounts to just about 28% of the electorate. Sir, I urge us not to create an adversarial system where there is none. As I said, Senator Cummings gave a very compelling argument why this legislation should not be passed, and I think we should listen to her. She gave a very good argument for recalling the vote as well, which is probably where we should be looking. Where if a member crosses the floor, that the constituents have the opportunity to recall the vote and leave it there. Let the constituents determine whether the person will sit or not. I know we're going to by-election and so on, but let us put that little buffer in there and just leave it there. Because we do not have an adversarial system at this time, and I do not believe we should be creating one. Do not weaponize our politics. Barbados has existed in the way that it has, as I said, as the current House and Cabinet and this Senate is constructed, it shows that we have a political maturity to get past these things. Let us not weaponize and create elections where they need not be. As the mighty Gabby said, let us not try to quell an unexistent rebellion. I like calypso, sir. And I would close my words with some words from Edmund Burke, the great British parliamentarian who was quoted in the other place in another instance. And this would be advice to the ruling party at this time. Because half a dozen grasshoppers hidden under a fern make the field ring with the noise of their importunate chink, while hundreds of great cattle sit quietly in the shade of an English oak, chewing the cud and are silent, pray do not imagine that those making the noise speak for all the inhabitants of the field. I thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers. Speakers? Senator Slocum.
Mr. President, I rise for the first time as the youngest senator in this chamber and in that of the other place as well. Sir, let me say, like a young batsman walking out for his first test. As I prepare, I recognize the weight of responsibility. Sir, I recognize the weight of expectation. But sir, I'm not daunted. I'm confident in my preparation. As I now face the proverbial first ball, we will call that a heavy ball, sir. Recognizing that this is a constitutional amendment. And by virtue of all the discussion that has happened in this country, it is a heavy ball, a controversial ball. But sir, I shall, with no hesitation, in this chamber, take you and the public on this first innings with me. Permit me, Mr. President, however, as customary amongst independent senators and all senators on their maiden address, to recognize that I stand upon the shoulders of my family, that in particular of my grandmother, sir. And if you would permit, I do request to invoke her name, Pauline Hall. Sir, my grandmother has been a force within my life, and she has been my moral compass. And I would recognize the values that she instilled in me to guide how I treat to debates in this chamber.
Mr. President, I stand knowing that equally, there are a significant number of Barbadians who, from my childhood, growing up in the eyes of the public, repose a sense of confidence in my ability. Some may argue in that of my ability to sing. But I am now using my voice for another reason, sir. Sir, I shall utilize this opportunity to be a voice of reason. I shall not renege on the commitment to be just, to be fair, and to be reasonable in my conduct, sir. As I said mere moments after taking my oath of office, to whom much is given, much is expected. Sir, so as I make my contribution today, this afternoon, allow me to premise for the general understanding of all, and in particular that for the knowledge of all members in this chamber, and quite frankly, sir, in the other place. When I rise, Your Honor, I am not an emissary, a proxy, advocate. Sir, I'm not a surrogate of any political institution or any entity in this country. I shall speak, sir, without fear, and I shall speak without favor. And at times, sir, against the will of some in this chamber, I shall sing in harmony, and at times, like a good Anglican boy I was raised to be, I shall sing the descant too. But sir, the matter at hand. Mr. President, I am desirous of first stating from the outset that this amendment has introduced the complexity of constitutional matters. It is no secret that there has been robust public debate. We hear it on the radio stations, we hear it when we walk the streets, we recognize it when we interact in places common to most Barbadians. And sir, I have heard members in the other place try to relegate this constitutional amendment, and by virtue of their own words, a no-brainer exercise. Sir, quite frankly, any constitutional amendment could never be a no-brainer exercise. It is a serious matter, and the intelligence of Barbadians, sir, I certainly for naught will insult. This amendment, at its core, has serious implications for the parliamentary architecture, sir, of our democracy. And I am equally concerned that the lane of this amendment has been an invitation for those to engage in political expediency. Sir, they have used this amendment all over as if it is a political football. And as a young man, I am troubled, sir. I want to say that I treat to all legislations or all forms of amendments of any form of legislation in a way that I am sure yourself and Her Honor, the Deputy President, will be most familiar with. Sir, clarity of thought, sense of purpose, expected outcomes. It is the methodology I will utilize now, sir, to examine this amendment. clarity of thought. Let us first ask, sir, what is the mandate? At the core of this amendment is a profound question. Sir, when a citizen casts a vote in a general election, what exactly are they choosing? When a citizen, sir, casts a vote in a general election, what exactly are they choosing? In our Westminster derived system, sir, it is well known that citizens vote in single-member constituencies. In 1971, if my memory serves correct, it was the abolition of the dual-member constituency system. But, sir, we must not pretend as if it is a pure individual contest, divorced from political parties. When we go to the polls to vote, yes, we see a name of an individual, but often that individual is associated, sir, with a political institution. We recognize, however, that some would exercise their constitutional right, and they will contest that election as an independent. Sir, but in the practical reality, campaigns are organized by political parties, sir. Manifestos are issued by political parties, sir. Leadership teams, sir, are chosen by the political party. Governance programs and policies are presented by the political party. A general election in most places happen with the understanding that political parties are a core part of the architecture of an election campaign. Sir, a candidate does not merely stand as Jamal or John or Jackie or whoever, sir. They stand on a defined platform under a recognized banner. And it is true, sir, that in other jurisdictions in the Eastern Caribbean, you would recognize that while there are great similarities in that of how our constitutions are formed, you would recognize that they too follow a similar model where individuals are elected. But when you go to the poll to vote, like in St. Lucia, you vote for Star or you vote for Flabeau. And in most of the contexts of Caribbean politics, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they vote with the key on the side, because that is the symbol of a political institution. But, sir, the truth is, there are two things on the ballot: trust in the personal integrity and the character of the individual who you're voting for. And secondly, sir, trust in the programs, policies, philosophies, whatever you want to call it, of a political institution. This is not conjecture, sir. This is observable political behavior. But, sir, what I want to draw to your attention is that clarity of thought requires us to admit that political parties are not peripheral actors. They are structural pillars of our representative democracy. So I move to clarity of thought. Why this legislation is being tabled? Let me from the outset, sir, state that I have reviewed a number of legislations made over a period of time. And it is my belief that with matters as significant as constitutional amendments, the brevity of objects and reasons is alarming to me. In fact, sir, I find it slightly offensive. Because a matter as a constitutional amendment should not be left to the speculation of the public at a time where civic participation as a result of the results of the last held general election seems to be at an all-time low. And therefore, sir, while I am not a drafter of legislation, permit me, sir, to recommend to those who hold that professional responsibility that it will be prudent to ensure you do not leave things to ambiguity. Because as I listen to all the discussions over the last few days, sir, I had quite a difficult time trying to isolate myself from the noise. Had I not spent time in quiet, in the solitude of my home, reviewing this amendment, sir, I may not have had an appreciation for its true contents. Sir, in principle, I agree with the general statement given in the objects and reasons. This bill would amend the Constitution in order to promote political stability by limiting parliamentarians' ability to cross the floor. Sir, stability. Stability ensures continuity of governance. Stability, sir, ensures the predictability of legislative majorities. Stability, confidence among citizens. Stability, confidence among investors. Confidence in public administration. Without stability, Your Honor, parliamentary arithmetic, sir, could be altered midterm by individual decisions that were never put before the electorate. Anybody could decide at any point in time, I doing what I want, as I please, without any safeguards for the interests of the electorate. So we must consider the principle involved. If a government, a collective of individual members, elected on a particular platform with a particular majority, and members subsequently realign in ways that fundamentally shift that majority, the will expressed at the polls, sir, would have been distorted. And that must be taken into consideration. This is not a theoretical concern, sir. In Commonwealth jurisdictions, floor crossing has led to sudden collapses of governments, opportunistic backdoor horse trading deals, as some authors have referred to them. Cabinet reshuffle, sir, driven by political survival, erosion of public trust, Your Honor. And might I say, a cash-in for some to get more sizable pension. Sir, the purpose of this amendment, in my view, is to say that electoral mandates are not transferable commodities. Electoral mandates are not transferable commodities. They are solemn trusts. Sir, I could agree that some may hold a different view on this, and I respect that view. But to my mind, I repeat for all to hear, electoral mandates are not transferable commodities. And therefore, sir, some with reasonable suspicion have asked or argued that this legislation would seriously abolish the independence of thought. Some may view that it criminalizes, sir, to some extent, dissent. Sir, I acknowledge, and I'm not blind to the reality, that this amendment, some have argued, that it could create the dominance of political parties. We must call a spade a spade. Sir, however, as I said from the outset, constitutional amendments are never simple matters. So, Mr. President, I acknowledge that some citizens and commentators may feel discomfort. They worry that party leadership may become too powerful. They argue, sir, that expulsion may be misused. Individual conscience, sir, may be constrained. This legislation does not assume bad faith. On my reading of this legislation, I do not assume that there's any indication of bad faith, nor should we. Democracy, sir, cannot function on the permanent presumption of ill will. We can't make amendments. We can't lay any form or draft every statute on the assumption that actors will abuse authority. Governance become impossible, sir, if we think that way solely. Therefore, sir, I choose to examine it from the perspective of constitutional systems, because they operate always on the structure of trust. Trust, sir. And some may find that this one word, hereon, may be used quite often. Trust, sir, that we have faith in our system. Trust that we have faith in our Constitution. Sir, Barbados operates under a written Constitution, an entrenched Bill of Rights, the supervisory jurisdiction of the High Court and judicial review. Sir, the principles of natural justice and common law. If a party's expulsion is fundamentally unfair, based on the discussion that I have had with independent legal luminaries, the judiciary has a responsibility to protect that interest. Sir, I don't wish for the public to believe that I am solely debating this on trust, but the truth is, electors trust candidates. Candidates trust their political parties in the first instance to be on a party's ticket. Parliament trusts, and sir, you too trust the procedures of this parliament, the standing orders. The nation trusts its courts. We trust the law courts every day. If we erode trust, sir, in every institution, we erode democracy itself. If we decide that we are going to take a position that erodes the trust in every institution simultaneously, sir, we essentially erode trust in democracy itself. This legislation requires us to trust that political parties will not act recklessly. It requires us to trust that party leaders understand the gravity of expelling a sitting member. Sir, it requires us to trust the Speaker will act in accordance with the Constitution. It also requires us to trust the courts will intervene when injustice occurs. So expected outcomes now, sir. The third point. What should this legislation achieve? Sir, I have read across various jurisdictions what is perceived to be, or what could be the potential outcome of this. We recognize that an individual would go back to the polls. Some have said, why not allow an individual, like former Prime Minister, that of Barbados, Owen Seymour Alpha, to sit as an independent member of Parliament? Sir, allow me, if it is your will, to read from the Constitution of Antigua and Barbuda. And if it's necessary, sir, I will make it a document of the House.
This is the latest version. This is currently.
Version, sir.
Thank you.
Correct. Sir, there's a reason why I don't celebrate this idea of an independent, sir. Sir, their anti-defection provisions are embedded directly within their Constitution. Section 41(1)(e). Sir, I quote, "If having been elected to the House by virtue of being a member of a political party, he resigns his party whip and withdraws his allegiance from that party, provided that he shall not be required to vacate his seat so long as he remains an independent member of the House." It is possible. It is done in our other jurisdictions. But here's where the tricky part happens. Sir, let me draw to your attention that currently in the House of Parliament, in that jurisdiction, a sitting member in that country, elected on the 18th day of January in the year of our Lord 2023, under the banner of the United Progressive Party, declared on 15th of July 2024 that he had left that party and become an independent member of the House. On the 15th of July 2024, he declared that he was an independent member of that House. Sir, if my memory serves correct and my ability to read a calendar, the 16th of July 2024 is the next day. He was sworn in as a member of the cabinet of that country, sir. An independent member of Parliament sitting as a member of the cabinet of that country. So the amendment, or what this Constitution states in Antigua, it protects the status of independence, sir, but it does not bring a sense of avoidance of that of alignment. Some, if we will conclude that if we take this approach, and I certainly do, it goes back to my point of horse trading and backdoor deals, and sir, I'm not imputing anything on the part negative on that of the member in that House of Assembly. I'm just suggesting that it is possible if that stance is taken here. And I was all for the independent position days ago. But, sir, it is important to note that trust in that instance was broken. As I conclude, sir, clarity of thought tells us that party affiliation is central to an electoral mandate. Sense of purpose, sir, reminds us that stability and integrity in governance are constitutional goods. Expected outcome, sir, reassures us that this reform or this amendment may strengthen rather than weaken public trust. Sir, we must trust the electorate. Sir, let me say this as I close. I do not like dirty love. And that may offend some on the other side, the government side, but I do not like dirty love. In my humble view, dirty love may not have happened had a member in 2018 crossed the floor and there was a dominant political figure in this place, this chamber, sir. And I say, with all respect to the man I refer to a great individual, that of former Senator Caswell Franklin. In my mind, he was more popular than the leader of the Democratic Labour Party at the time. Everybody loved Senator Franklin then. I certainly did. I don't want to talk about snow or whatever. But the truth is, the Democratic Labour Party entered a general election then and faced a second consecutive defeat. I want to say here as well that it would not have happened, sir, the last election. I have the opportunity and a humble privilege, sir, to travel across this region consulting with other political parties. And I want to say that I don't believe it would have happened in the last general election had not the former opposition leader crossed the floor and eject the then president of the Democratic Labour Party from his seat. In fact, sir, the two honorable senators to my left may not have been here. I am of the opinion that by virtue there would not have been more former members of the Democratic Labour Party sitting in this chamber, that around this table, that is, had that not occurred either. So I have my reservations, and I will continue to listen to this debate before I make any conclusion. And I will do so with a sense of understanding that this is a serious constitutional matter. With that, sir, I much oblige you.
Thank you very much, Senator Jamal Slocum. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that this sitting of the Senate be suspended for lunch to resume at 3 p.m.
The question is that the Honorable Senate do now be suspended until 3 p.m. today. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The sitting is currently suspended until 3 p.m. today.